today. My apologies, I think I missed the last masterclass as I was on a ski slope at the time, but thanks to Nicola, who's in the room, I think, for chairing that last meeting. Perfect. So what we want to do in this program is about developing the future career researchers. Everyone in this room has already committed to a career in clinical education research. And we want to do is help develop the skills that allow you to achieve your goals and become our future leaders in this discipline. So we want to build capacity in leadership. We're really keen that you connect across the group during the meeting, but beyond the meetings. And in doing so, this is an opportunity for the programme to enhance sustainability and ultimately impact of clinical education research. So we've had 2 earlier masterclasses, and we're delighted that Peter is joining us today from University of Northumbria. And Peter is going to, well, actually, I'll your title, Peter, I've written it down actually here. So let's have is Professor in Public Health and Knowledge Mobilisation. A lengthy title. And so, Peter, you're going to be talking us about knowledge mobilisation, which is absolutely critical to impact of clinical education research. So thank you for joining us. And then we're going to be joined by Karen Mattick, who's going to talk about her career journey from science into clinical education leadership. So, and we'll have a little break in the middle. So if that, I'll pause to see if there are any questions about today's session. I'm hoping not, but if otherwise, we will go over to Peter and let you take the floor. Many thanks again.
Thank you for that introduction, Jill. Thank you for having me here. Nice to meet you all. I think there's some clear winners for best background already, so that's good to see. I'll just start some slides like Jill, if that's okay, and then talk you through them. But I'd like to make the session quite interactive, so there will be a few breakout rooms to ask you to think through some of the things I'm talking about and have a go yourself. And hopefully we get a good conversation going today. So bear with me for a second while I bring up my slides. Present mode. Right, can people see this? Yeah, I see thumbs up. That's okay. So thank you for having me today. So as Jill already said, I'm based at Northumbria University, where I work as a professor in public health and knowledge mobilisation. And I hope today to sort of help you to make sense a bit of what is knowledge mobilisation, why is it important, why should we even bother thinking about it, and why can it often be so hard, and can we make it easier? And hopefully today will help to make it easier. So I work a lot in sort of public health research, but particularly in sort of collaborative research partnerships across various research infrastructures, Northeast and nationally as well. So I'm always interested in how do you get research evidence into policy practice and communities, and that's where my interest in knowledge mobilisation comes from. Just to give you a bit of an overview, what sort of I would like to cover as part of this sort of workshop today. So to introduce you knowledge mobilisation as a concept, explain a bit why it matters, and share some relevant approaches around knowledge mobilisation, but also, as I said, give you a chance to apply some of these approaches in sort of breakout discussions, hopefully to help you think through, if I want to develop a knowledge mobilisation for my clinical education research project, what could that look like? So we talk about sort of what sort of problems will it address? What are other approaches in this space? I'll talk briefly about some principles and frameworks and models around knowledge mobilisation, but quite quickly move into the more practical side. So what does it look like when you start doing this? What are some of the important questions you can ask, and the tools and templates available to do this? And then finishing on some remaining challenges, but also making it fun. And that's where the dance shoes come in that you see as a picture on the slide, and hopefully that will make sense towards the end of it. Are we all happy with that? Yep, I see some nodding. So let's go down. I always like to sort of start, and this is really important in observation, with a bit of a fun and a bit of check-in to see how we're doing today, how we can do this from the start. So can I ask you to post in the chat how you're feeling today? This is the famous scale of cats. They're cats in different positions with expressing different feelings. So if you're energized, cat number 3, or really bored, 7, or quite angry, can you give me an indication of where you are on the scale of cats by putting that into the chat? I see a 7, Krim. Someone is really tired. Okay. Someone up for party mode, number 9. 5 people having hangovers by the look of it. Lazing in a chair. Right, so we're all over the place today with how we're feeling. Hopefully I can get you a bit more towards number 3 or 6 or even 9. You're ready for the party after this. So thank you for giving that a go. And I think it's helpful sometimes to understand where people are in a space before you start talking about knowledge mobilization and how they think about research. So thank you for giving that a go. Let me launch into sort of why does knowledge mobilization matter? Why do you need to really think about this? So I like to start with a bit of a quiz, and you might know the answer to this. I've seen this before, but give it a go. So first question is, how long does it take for you? How long do you think it takes for research evidence to get into practice and policy and communities? And I've given you a bit of a hint there already. I've given you years. So on the question mark, what do you think? Can you post in the chat? How long do you think does it take for research? 5 years, I see. Okay, that's a good opening bit. Anyone else? 7, 8, 17, 15. Okay, so there's quite a variety, but I think people have seen some of this because you're absolutely right. The right answer is 17. So there's been research done where they looked at the process from research being developed to when does it show up in policy and practice and inform changes in that practice and policy. And unfortunately, that shows it takes 17 years. So it takes really an awful lot of time for research to get into practice. Next question, what percentage of research do you think makes it into practice after those 17 years? So what's the percentage that makes it? 1%. Oh, someone is very pessimistic. 20% more, 2. Any other bits? 25? 15? Yeah, you're not far off. It's about 14% of research makes it into practice after 17 years. And this means to me, I think this shows that a lot of research is wasted, is not used even after that long time. And knowledge mobilization is all about how do we improve that? How do we get more research into practice, and how do we reduce that time gap, so less than 17 years? So that's what I'll be talking about today. And to do that, to explore sort of what's underlying that time lag and the limited research getting into practice, is sort of a knowledge doing gap. And to illustrate that, I'm going to tell you a little story which involves an air balloon. So a man in a hot air balloon realizes that he was lost. So he reduces altitude and spotted a woman below. So he came low and shouted, "Excuse me, can you help? I promised a friend I would meet him, but I don't know where I am." So the woman below replied, "You're in a hot air balloon, hovering approximately 30 feet above the ground. You're between 40 and 41 degrees north latitude and between 59 and 60 degrees west longitude." "You must be a researcher," said the balloonist. "I am," replied the woman. "How did you know?" "Well," answered the balloonist, "everything you told me is technically correct, but I've no idea what to make of your information, and the fact is, I'm still lost. Frankly, you've been not much help at all. If anything, you've delayed my trip." The woman below responded, "You must be a policymaker." "I am," replied the balloonist, "but how did you know?" "Well," said the woman, "you don't know where you are or where you're going. You made a promise which you've no idea how to keep, and you expect people beneath you to solve your problems. The fact is, you are in exactly the same position you were in before we met, but now, somehow, it's my fault." This story is a bit stereotypical, but it illustrates there's very different perspectives on what data is, how you use it, how you apply it, and how do you make it useful, and how do you communicate it. And I think that's worthwhile exploring as part of the knowledge doing gap. So we know there is this gap between doing. I'll just bring this out up so you can have a look. Let maybe start with the top one because that's easier. So if you look at sort of the different ways in which researchers and practitioners know and do. So researchers are trying to answer research questions and trying to sort of explore the unknown, while practitioners are more focused on solving practical issues and are more interested in what works in solving those practical issues. Researchers are incentivized and have to publish papers for their career development and are assessed on the number and quality of those papers that they publish, while practitioners are maybe more interested in writing reports and looking at patient records and also assessed on the patient outcomes they deliver and the financial efficiency of services they deliver as part of that. So they got very different goals in that perspective. And how they achieve those goals is researchers are interested in rigorous data collection and analyzing that data in great detail, which takes quite a lot of time, while practitioners are often under pressure to deliver quick wins and haven't got the time to go in detail in that data. So they look at things like evaluation and improvement as valuable activities to make those quick wins and look at data. Well, evaluation and improvement is often not deemed as proper research by academic researchers. So there's a real difference in perception about data and usage and what for. We also know from research why that is the case. So why does it take so long from research to be demobilized in practice? Why does so little of the research make it? And the first one is maybe pretty obvious. It often takes too long to report research findings. As academics, we're brilliant at publishing papers once decisions in practice or policy have already been taken. We're also very good at pointing out what some of the problems are, but not always very good at highlighting what the solutions are for those practice problems. And we've got our pet projects as academic researchers, and that often fails to address the most pressing local issues for practitioners and policymakers. And even if there's evidence available in time, it still has to be adapted to the local context in which it needs to be used. And practitioners then may lack the skills in searching, appraising, and synthesizing evidence in that context to apply it for the solutions that they need to solve. And then there's the big elephant in the room for me. Research is often only one part of the puzzle in informing decision making in practice and policy. So apart from research evidence, there's other types of knowledge such as technical expertise, so the practical skills and experience and expertise of frontline staff, the practical wisdom and professional judgment, values and beliefs of decision makers in that space and patients and service users who often trump the research evidence in that decision making process. So if you're not aware of that and try to push the research evidence without blending it with those other types of knowledge, you often miss making a change and influencing those decisions. So tackling the next question, and now we know what some of the problems are knowledge mobilization. What is knowledge mobilization? How do we define it, and therefore how can we work with it? And I like this image of a ball both being pushed and pulled, but still not moving, and that's sort of symptomatic for a lot of knowledge, I think. So there's the push approach where finished research, once research is done and the research is published, is trying to be pushed out to practice and policy. So it's implemented into practice. And this is where implementation science comes in, identifying best approaches to implementing existing evidence bases and innovations into practice and policy. Then on the other side, you've got the pull approaches where practitioners look at existing evidence and try to pull it into their practice and decision making. And this is where a lot of quality improvement approaches come in. So using evidence from research and other sources to improve the outcomes of a particular service provision. But why not? Why can't it be both? Why can it not be push and pull? And this is where we talk about knowledge exchange, knowledge mobilization, where we're trying to align push and pull approaches and have an exchange of knowledge between the knowledge producers and the knowledge users. And that's when we talk about co-production of research, collaborative research partnerships, community partnerships. So let's explore that a bit further, because as you might be aware, there's a lot of different names banding around similar to knowledge mobilization. There's translational research, knowledge translation, integrated knowledge translation, knowledge exchange, co-production, co-design. There's a lot of words and they're often used interchangeably without sort of clarifying what we mean with those words and what that means for how we use and apply them. So how I would unpack and define knowledge mobilization, in its simplest form, I think the top definition, the process of moving knowledge to where it can be most useful. I think that's sort of a key tenet. It's that moving of knowledge where it's useful. The second definition from the Knowledge Mobilization Alliance, I think, combines a lot of useful elements to define what knowledge mobilization is. So it's bringing diverse communities together to share and create new knowledge in the context of its use to actively change something. And there's a couple of things in here. So it's about bringing diverse communities together, researchers, policymakers, practitioners, local communities, not only to share knowledge, but also to create knowledge. So academics are not the only creator of knowledge. And particularly in the context of its use. So where is it needed? Where can we create that knowledge together in that particular context? And not just for the fun of it, but to actively change something. So what's that change that we want to enact in that particular context? And how do we work with those different communities to do that? The final sort of element is in the third definition, which looks sort of more at the boundaries between knowledge producers and knowledge users are purposefully blurred and utilized. So it's not necessarily maybe about a gap between knowledge producers and knowledge users, but how do you blur the boundaries between them? So how do you create that process where it becomes more blurred what the user and producer is? And that's sort of illustrated in this picture. So instead of looking at a gap where you can drop off a cliff end, it's how do we blur some of the different colors together, the different types of knowledge in a more effective way to inform practice and policy. Sorry. A way to do that, to sort of help you think how do you blur those boundaries, is the 6 knowledge sharing principles. And this has been developed by the School for Public Health Research, funded by NIHR, who works with a lot of partners nationally in public health. And they develop these principles collectively with stakeholders. And this is now part of their application process. So if you apply for funding through the School for Public Health Research, you need to answer these 6 questions as part of your application. And these are used in the development and also the delivery of your research to see how well you address these questions. So they're formal and common conversations with a knowledge exchange broker as part of the school. And the first question is really about why do we want to share knowledge? What do you want your findings to do or to change? So that last bit of the definition. So clarify your purpose and knowledge sharing goals. Why do we need to share this knowledge? What do we change would we like to have? And from that, identify your knowledge users and stakeholders. So who would be interested in this research and who needs to know about it? Once you've got that clear, it's then thinking about how can I design the research around the expertise of those different knowledge users and stakeholders? How can I involve them in the design and in the research process and dissemination of the research findings? How do I build that in and not save it to the end of the research process? The fourth step is then about agreeing expectations. So once you've identified your stakeholders and sort of worked out how you want to work with them, how do you agree expectations, how you will go about that? How you get a shared understanding of what you will do, what your stakeholders will deliver as part of the research process, and how do you deal with conflict if that arises? How do you support and solve that conflict? The last one is, or the fifth one, is about then monitoring and reflecting what you said you would do as part of your knowledge sharing goals in question 1. So how do you know that what you said you would do is working and your activities are meeting your goals? How can you collect data along the way of your research process to understand how well you're achieving your knowledge mobilization goals? And the last one is, I think, the most important one, but often one that gets forgotten, is about leaving a legacy. So how can you develop, capture, and sustain any benefits from the knowledge mobilization activities that you are doing beyond the research project? Researchers are sometimes accused of doing a runner. They go in a locality with their research projects, work intensely with stakeholders, but once the funding is finished, they leave and leave the stakeholders to it. How can you make that a more sustainable relationship and leave a legacy for the people behind that they can work with when you're gone, or continue working with you on a different basis? And building that in as part of the research process can really be helpful. So I'll stop here for a minute and stop sharing as well, because what I would like you to do, I'll split you up in different breakout rooms where I would like you to have a bit of a think together about how could you apply these 6 knowledge sharing principles in your own educational research projects. Maybe pick one or pick one as a group, or you can share from your own experience of the project that you're doing. But how would you answer these 6 different questions? I will post them in the chat so you can use them in your conversations. And we do that quite rapidly. It's about 10 minutes each just to have a first go. So maybe you only get to the first question, that's fine. Or you might like to start with a different question, that's fine too. But would you mind having a go in a breakout room to look at some of these knowledge sharing questions and see how you would answer them for your particular project? So I'll stop sharing for a moment so I can see everyone again.
Peter, are you able to see the questions in the chat?
Yep, I'll do that.
Perfect.
So just bear with me a second. That's not right. Right.
Are there any questions for Peter before we move into the room?
Yeah, any
immediate questions, maybe?
Any questions first? We move into breakout. Does that make sense? Does that resonate with some of your own experiences, or do you disagree? That's fine too. I'm just really curious about your experiences in this space. If I've stunned you into silence.
I think no questions is only okay. Positive. That's only positive. I would take that as
right. I leave it in the capable hands of Marta because she's sort of in charge of the breakout room. So I think the idea is we split you in 4 breakout rooms, so with 5-6 people in a room, and just have a go at the questions, or maybe start with the first one based on a project that you're either working on or want to work on or have worked on, and we'll see where we get. And after 10 minutes, we'll come back together and reflect a bit on what we shared in the different breakout rooms. Would that be okay?
Okay, so
welcome back, everyone. I appreciate that. It was really brief, and I appreciate there was not everybody could see the questions in the chat room, so apologies if that was the case. Hopefully you still were able to have a bit of an initial conversation about what do you think about the knowledge sharing principles. Is this something you've come across before? Is that a useful way of thinking about it? And in the room I was in, room number 1, we sort of talk more generally about how do you integrate this part of your project so it's not a separate stream or separate person business, but how do you make this part and parcel of your application and protocol development? But I'm curious to hear from other groups, and group 1 of course as well, what did you take away from that brief discussion that you had, and any key ideas or messages or frustrations? Andy, you got your hand up. Would you like to come in?
Yeah, I'm happy just to share our discussion. I felt like I was really helped in that. Actually, it was very useful. So my research looks at how medical students learn and form their professional identity during clinical placements. And I'm coming to the end of quite a long study, and I'm relatively new to this field, but I'm looking at how to disseminate it. And we've focused on the number 2, I think it was stakeholders.
Yeah.
So I work at University of Sheffield, and I lead a postgraduate course. I lead the PG Cert in medical education and do various things with local trusts. But I was trying to think more. I've been trying to think more broadly about how to disseminate it past Sheffield, other than just, I'll be writing up the papers and stuff.
Yeah.
And so the group came up with some great ideas, things that I hadn't considered. So I hadn't really considered, I've been considering students and clinical educators and GMC and things, but there were some great ideas about thinking about patients and the ultimate outcome of what this research and its impact might have on patient groups. And I hadn't always thought about that, which was useful. And thinking about other healthcare roles that support medical students and the groups that are associated with those. Policy, I think it was the Council of Deans and the National Foundation School, and also this group. So if I had a synopsis or an abstract for various bits of info, trying to share it through this, because I suppose that's one of the reasons why I signed up to this is, I'm looking to develop my research, but also my network. And so that's one of the reasons I signed up here, is to meet new people doing this type of stuff.
Yep.
And that was the 8-minute conversation, basically.
That sounds like a great conversation in 10 minutes. And I think that can be a very legitimate aim to sort of expand your network as part of the research, because your network is usually a key part of your knowledge mobilization network who can help you disseminate the findings or introduce it to particular decision makers or practitioners who need to use the findings. So building your network as part of the research can be really an important knowledge mobilization goal. And your point about the patients, and because often it's seen as sort of as a separate strand. We have a PPI strand in research, application development, and doing the research. But I see PPI as part of knowledge mobilization. It's a particular knowledge user group that you can incorporate and work with as part of your research, like other stakeholder groups, including other practitioners, networks, policymakers. So but thinking through what these different groups are and how you can engage them and work with them to achieve the goals that you set for your research in terms of impact is really helpful. So not seeing it as something separate, but integrated as part of that wider strategy. So is it great that you've identified it as a group? Jason, you've had your hand up very patiently, so would you like to come in?
Yeah, thank you. Just a similar kind of, it was really helpful for me discussing it with our group. So I'm a psychiatrist, but one of my interests is in how can we help supervisors better support resident doctors to develop more positive responses to uncertainty, which was related to my PhD. And going through the kind of questions, it was good to kind of help me think through the stakeholders and the people I hadn't necessarily previously tried to engage with in developing resources for supervisors. But my main reflection at the end of it, which I guess I'm sure people can relate to, is that this research, although it's my real kind of interest and passion, as my PhD is finished and this isn't a funded thing anymore, I'm trying to find money for other projects. This isn't one of them at the moment. And actually to do this stuff well, I'm just trying to steal time from elsewhere to do it. And I'm probably the type of work that we're talked through in our group would be really great to help take this to the next level, but it needs funding or time or some kind of ability to make that happen. And it's really difficult to do that alongside, other jobs and other research grants when you're always thinking about the next thing, unless you build this into the grant from the start, I guess, which is the point you were making a second ago.
Yeah, exactly. But I fully appreciate the challenge of doing that when you're in the middle of delivering a project and then have to start thinking about your next grant application already and how do you build time for this in as well. But it's, yeah, trying to build that into process, because it's a lot of funders will ask you, what are the beneficiaries of your research? Why should we fund this research? Who's going to be better at the end of this? And how can you ensure that the people that need to be better at the end of this get to see the research findings and use them in a way that will enable that? So it's a lot of application and funders already ask for this information, and so if you bake it in from the start, it's much easier to respond to that and develop a really high quality research proposal that is more likely to get funded. But it still requires the time, like you say, to think these questions through and build them into your research process. But that's maybe where groups like this can be really helpful, because I always find research a very collaborative effort. It's not something I do on my own in a room somewhere thinking everything through. I learn the most from talking to people about what I want to do and how I want to do it, and they can help me answer those questions and inform what my research will look like. So having conversations with other people about this can really help develop your ideas for future funding applications in this way. Thank you for sharing that, Jason. That's really helpful. Any other reflections from other groups about was this helpful? Were there particular questions that triggered them? Nicola, would you like to come in?
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, I'll just feed back what we talked about in our group. And of the 6 knowledge sharing principles, we kind of zoomed in on the identifying knowledge users.
Okay.
And one of the other participants talked about their PhD, which is around medical optimization, and how, their main end users or knowledge users are foundation doctors or medical students.
Oh, cheers. Thanks.
When it comes to funding bodies, there's always a push to have like PPI and that kind of dilemma of, who is the real end user, and is it still relevant to have PPI participants as part of your study? So we had a bit of a conversation around that.
Right. Did you came to some sort of consensus, or was there different opinions about how to do that?
I think we agreed that both types, like a professional group of PPI participants as well as patient reps, are important, and that you would ask them different questions. That like patients would focus on kind of more broader aspects, maybe language, kind of higher level type stuff, whereas the end users or the professional group would focus on more specifics about aspects of the intervention potentially. Lily, Richard, and Russell, feel free to jump in if you want to say anything else.
No, I think that's it. I think it was about managing expectations, to harking back to talking about grant applications and things like that, and what makes a successful grant application. How much of it is requires a shift in mindset from thinking who am I really doing the research for, whereas who do I need to engage for grant funding and to make sure that the chances of knowledge mobilization are greatest.
Yeah, and I think that's not an either or question. I think it's if done well, that they should come together really nicely. So if you think from the start, who are the different people who need to do something with the findings of my research, and they probably need to do different things, and that then translates into different knowledge mobilization goals and different ways of engaging these different stakeholder groups in your research design, conduct, and dissemination. And so, but clarifying those differences between groups and how you will engage and what you ask them to do is important, and then informs your PPI strategy and engagement with other stakeholders. So yeah, I think it's not an either or, I think, and there's different knowledge users groups that is good to be mindful of, and how you want to engage them differently in your research, and also ask them that question, how do you want to be engaged, because some people really don't want to, or haven't got the time, or have limited availability, can only do this. And so sometimes being very strategic in what part of the research process you want to involve them in a specific way that suits their needs and time can be really helpful, and avoid disappointment in expectations. So yeah, very helpful reflections. Any final thoughts before I move on, or is that the main reflections from the different breakout rooms?
Was there one more room? Just to...
Is there one more room who didn't have chance yet to?
3 rooms, if no pressure.
You don't have to. If you feel it's covered in existing discussions, that's fine. Everybody's happy. Okay, I'll move on. I'll bring the slides back up. So bear with me a second. Right, so we've done this. There you go. Yeah, done this. Right, so what I would like to do now is talk a bit more about particular knowledge mobilization framework and models to help you color in some of these questions from the 6 knowledge sharing principles, and get to sort of a bit of an action plan of how to incorporate this into your research applications and proposals. So to start with a bit of a model. So this is a framework that's often used in knowledge mobilization. It's a knowledge to action framework. It's a process model, as you can see in sort of the cyclic framework, the models and the errors. What this highlights to me is the process that we as researchers are most involved in is happening in the circle. So in the center of the framework. So the knowledge creation, where there's a particular knowledge inquiry, a research question, we then collect and synthesize knowledge around that, and then produce certain knowledge tools and products from that research. And what this framework highlights is that is really only part of the process, because what happens after that is also then thinking through how can you adapt that knowledge to local context? How can you assess barriers to knowledge use for what you've created and synthesized? And how then do you select, tailor, and implement interventions based on that knowledge about barriers, and then monitor the use of that knowledge in that context through evaluating outcomes, and how do you sustain that knowledge in that? So there's a cycle happening around the knowledge creation process that we're often not aware of, and particularly the one on the left, I think, is really important for knowledge mobilization. So that adapting knowledge to local context, knowing the barriers of knowledge use in a particular context, and how then do you tailor and localize some of the knowledge products, interventions that you're developing in that context. So to unpack that a bit, this is a model that we developed within FUSE, and FUSE is the Center for Public Translational Research in Public Health. It's a partnership between the 6 Northeast universities, Northeast and North Cumbria universities. And as you see, it's based on both push and pull. And it sort of highlights the 4 steps that are important in knowledge mobilization that are sort of iterative. You can move up and down the different steps. And the first step is really about awareness raising. So how do we make evidence users and sponsors aware of research that we're doing and that's happening within the programs and structures that we're working? And this is often where a lot of knowledge mobilization stops. So it's about communicating the research. There's a big website, social media accounts. In Fuse, we had a dedicated communication officer who helped with the development of different communication outputs and was really good at that. But that in itself is not enough for knowledge to be mobilized. So step 2 in this process is thinking through how can you create opportunities for research users and producers to come together to sort of explore that knowledge in more detail, to do some sense making and mutual learning around that knowledge, how it can be applied in their context. And that's where we use within Fuse a lot of events and seminars and joint meetings, often led by practice and policy partners, where we ask them, what keeps you up at night, and can we organize a meeting around that, bringing in different experts and knowledge users to understand the problem better, but also to find solutions for them? And if it's not existing research, can we develop a research agenda around this? But again, that in itself is not enough if users understand the knowledge that's available and how they can use it. It's then how do you make that evidence fit for purpose in the context where it's needed? And this is all about sort of tailoring and localizing evidence. And how we did that in Fuse, we had a dedicated broker service called Ask Fuse, a rapid response and evaluation service. We worked with knowledge exchange brokers. We also had embedded researchers who worked in practice context and drew upon knowledge together with the people that they were working with as part of that context. So making evidence fit for purpose was a really important step in that process. But again, that was not enough to embed the knowledge into practice. And that is where the 4th step comes in. It's really about supporting the uptake and implementation of research evidence into practice. And this is often about long-term relationship building with the knowledge users and funders and commissioners, also building capacity in using research evidence and mobilizing it within that setting. So all these steps are important and often iterative. So for instance, when you start sharing knowledge through events, that might raise up new questions that you need to raise awareness about through different communication tools. So you can move up and down in this process, but this helped us sort of think through what are the different steps that we need to take and how can we link them more effectively to really get knowledge embedded into practice context and make it useful there. And to give you some examples, this is what we did within Fuse around step 1, around the awareness raising. So we had various creative communication tools and formats. So we had briefs, which are more like policy briefs, 2 pages, snappy, short, lots of actionable recommendations for policymakers, lots of pictures to make it visual. We used blogs as a way of more personally reflecting on practice experiences, often written by practitioners and policymakers themselves. We had podcasts led by public members where they questioned or interviewed researchers about their research and trying to make sense in that dialogue through podcasts. We even had stand-up comedy around hazardous wastes, but also theatre performances to really sort of connect elected members with some of the findings around the impact of universal credit on health and well-being of residents. But also animations, gaming, mobile apps, infographics. So they're all different communication tools you can use to reach different audiences and get messages to them in different ways. And it's worth considering some of these as part of your knowledge mobilization goals. And as part of the 3rd step, I would like to sort of highlight the sort of making evidence fit for purpose, the usefulness of embedded researchers. So these are people who are co-located within sort of non-academic organizations. So in Fuse, this was in local authorities, public health teams, where researchers were embedded usually for a number of months or sometimes for a number of years, where they worked very closely with the public health team on co-producing findings that sort of fit in that organization's unique context and culture, working together, building capacity with the public health team members around research, scoping research questions and different types of knowledge and data for that project, and also really working across different organizational boundaries, both within the local authority, but across different health and care organizations that they were working with in the local authority context to sort of co-produce that knowledge. So that was a very helpful mechanism for sort of building and tailoring and localizing the evidence. And the picture you see is based on research that Vicky Ward and colleagues did around sort of embedded research roles, particularly in NHS organizations. And they used the metaphor of a garden, that you need to tend to different parts of the garden to be able to embed research. And they visualize that in different parts and different ways in the graphic. If you're interested, feel free to look up the link. I'll share some references at the end if you want to read more about what they say about these different parts of the embedded research garden. So with that sort of knowledge in mind about some different frameworks and steps you can take, how do you put that into practice? And this is for me where knowledge mobilization plans come in. And one I particularly like is referenced at the bottom, is done by the Knowledge Institute on Child and Youth Health and Addiction Toolkit, quite a mouthful, also known as the Canadian Knowledge Mobilization Toolkit. And it basically asks a series of simple follow-up questions following the 6 knowledge sharing principles to plan in more detail what knowledge mobilization activities could look like, and action plan around that. So what sort of resources do you need, what time planning, who should be involved in what way, who should lead on this. But it starts with that question, so the what. So what knowledge are you planning to mobilize? What are your intended goals? What are your key messages? And it gives you sort of specific examples within the templates that you can think about and try to play with as part of your response to that question. Similarly, the why. So why are you interested in mobilizing this knowledge? Why are you doing this research? What are you trying to achieve? Is it to educate, to inspire, to motivate, or engage different stakeholder audiences? And being clear of that from the start can be really helpful in developing a knowledge mobilization plan in more detail. And why are these sort of messages important for different audiences? The who is also really important. So who is involved in the sharing of knowledge? Who can you mobilize as part of the research process to help you share research findings that you are developing, that are emerging? And who are your partners? Who are your champions? Who can champion evidence in different settings to inform practice? And who should be engaged in those activities? So not only your partners in sharing, but also in engaging in knowledge mobilization activities themselves. So there's different who's you can look at as part of the knowledge mobilization plan. And there's a series of questions around the how. So how will you deliver your messages to these different audiences? And this relates to the first step in the fused knowledge exchange model with the different creative outputs that you can think about, but also the events and the embedded researchers or knowledge exchange brokers. So there's different mechanisms to get your message to these different audiences. And how will you engage them when developing these messages during your knowledge mobilization activities? And then the when is also important. So what is the good timing for this? So we're not going to wait 17 years, but how can we do this well within the timescales of the research projects and the mobilization plan itself? So when do you hope to mobilize this knowledge? And are there maybe already existing activities taking place that might influence the uptake of your knowledge that you can tag onto? So conferences, awareness days, community events. So what's there already that you can use, and what's the availability of stakeholders' time themselves that you can incorporate as part of the research design process? And then the question about measuring. So how will you know you've achieved your goals? What type of indicators will you use to measure that effort? What sort of data is maybe available that you can easily collect to demonstrate you're achieving your knowledge mobilization goals? Or what evaluation questions can you produce or will be useful to produce meaningful findings? So thinking through what data measures are helpful in demonstrating your knowledge mobilization goals. And this is sort of an example of the template of the knowledge mobilization, Canadian knowledge mobilization toolkit. So this is the who particularly. So it asks you a series of questions, and then there's a number of tick boxes to think through different knowledge mobilization groups or audiences that you want to engage. And it asks you a series of questions about what do you partner, what can you think your partners can bring to the table? So not only you doing things to them, but what can they do to you? What knowledge can they bring to the table that will be helpful in informing your planning and design of your knowledge mobilization efforts? And then the point about timing, so they all can't be involved at the same time. So what is a good way to involve them? How will you engage them at what time in your knowledge mobilization efforts and research? And who are your champions and key knowledge mobilizers in that process that you've identified through sort of your stakeholder analysis? So the template gives you a helpful way of thinking through and breaking down some of these principles and writing down some initial responses that then inform sort of an action plan at the end that really stipulates quite clearly who should do what at what time, what resources are needed for this. And that can be a helpful way of making your knowledge mobilization plan really practical. So what I would like to do next is another breakout session to sort of have a go at this. So if you want to develop a knowledge mobilization plan for your research projects or your clinical education research projects, can you have a go at these sort of 4 questions from the Who section of the Canadian Knowledge Mobilization Toolkit? So who are your project partners for your particular project? Who else is involved in mobilizing this knowledge and evidence? And what do you want your partners to bring to the table? How can they assist you with the planning, doing, and evaluation of your knowledge mobilization activities and efforts? And how can they do that? When will you engage them? And who are your particular champions and key knowledge mobilizers in that process? So I would like you to have a go at this again in your breakout rooms. Look at these questions and sort of come up with some initial ideas and responses if you can identify the different who's. So I'll stop here for a second and stop sharing so people can see them.
Do you want to just pop those questions again in the chat?
Yep,
so
I'll do those?
And then maybe, can I suggest that you put the slide again and maybe people can take pictures, because if not everyone could see in the previous break. Yeah, maybe they could. And then the other thing I was going to ask Peter and Jill is just that we're running slightly ahead of the schedule. So I wonder if you'd like to have a couple more minutes in the breakout rooms.
Yeah, that's, I mean, that sounds good. Are there any, I mean, Peter's covered a lot of ground. So just to check, first of all, if there are any questions about moving from principles to a KM plan. Any questions for Peter that maybe speak to your own work that you wanted to share before we go into the breakout rooms?
Any questions about the frameworks or models or templates? Do they make sense? Or Russell, would you like to come in?
Yeah, question. They certainly make sense. I was just reflecting on at what point. I mean, I guess the plans might develop and evolve as you're going through a research project, because you might have some initial ideas, and then as your knowledge develops, your plan for mobilizing the knowledge might change. Can you give some idea about how often you might revisit these plans or reconsider them?
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. I use them as living documents, so and sometimes there's questions you can't answer at this stage because you haven't identified your key stakeholders yet, but it can help you think of them as part of the research team. So I usually have these regular meetings with the team. So usually we have bi-weekly or monthly meetings, and this is one of the agenda items. Have we got any updates for the knowledge mobilization plan? Have we got any activities that we want to develop or we have delivered, but we're not sure if they're reaching the audience and achieving the goals that we set out to do? Do we need to think of different goals for different audiences? So and sometimes the answer is simple, no, it's going all right. We know what we're doing. Let's carry on doing. But also measure the impact and monitor that and look at the legacy that we can leave at the end. But often it sparks a bit of a conversation. Oh yeah, we've been to this event and there we talked to these people and they brought some really new knowledge to the table that we think is helpful in shaping what we do in our next work package. So it's I think having it tabled as an agenda item on regular team meetings is just helpful. And they become sort of a living document that you update as you go along, because a lot of this will become clearer as you go through the research process. But it's almost having those questions in your mind when you go through the research process to help them color in. It's much easier to do instead of trying to do retrospectively. Good question, Russell. Thank you. Any other questions or reflections at this stage, or are we all keen to go back in breakout rooms?
So we've got, how long, Marta? Up to 3:15, yes?
I set up for 12 minutes.
So 12 minutes, perfect, thank you.
So see you in 12 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. Sorry, Nicola, I know you were mid-sentence when we were chucked out of the break.
Don't worry.
So apologies. Thank you all for giving that a go. How how helpful were those questions sort of in thinking through the who, particularly around your knowledge mobilization plan? Was that helpful? Were the particular questions in there that you found useful or not? So what did you take away from the discussions that you had in the breakout room? Daniel, you want to come in?
Yeah, so we covered a couple of other questions based on some of my experiences. And actually, we spent very little time on the who, because I think that's
Okay.
something that I probably have well defined. And for me, it was more the how.
Okay.
And in taking the idea of wanting to do this knowledge mobilization, recognizing the value of the work, and then translating that into the reality of the amount of time I might have to do this and how to be most effective. And then coming out when the project's going on, like what plans, how do I manage the ongoing knowledge mobilization partnerships during a project? Like what's the process to do that? And it reflected like how my previous project, that hadn't happened. It hadn't gone well. My plan had not been pandemic proof and it just got jettisoned. So yeah, I think moving on towards the practicalities, I think was my main reflection from our conversation.
Okay. Did you get any suggestions from the group about the how, what sort of activities you could do to manage those different partnerships throughout the research process?
We didn't quite get onto the managing it through, but in terms of the plans for how to do it, like built in with the plan, there was just our reflections on the widespread nature of knowledge mobilization that you presented in your project, and like how that's almost certainly the only way to reach people is to do it in multiple different ways, multiple times, and but that some of the more creative ones, perhaps a bit beyond my wheelhouse in terms of like how do I get from my research project to stand-up comedy or participatory theatre? Like there's a big gap there in terms of having any idea of how to do that.
No, I completely agree. I appreciate that, Daniel. It's more sort of a wish list or a long shopping list, sort of a menu of things you can potentially look at. And it's also not doing this all yourself, but bringing people who can help you with this. There's usually various people in universities who are skilled with this, who've got expertise. We've worked with art and media students as part of placements to help us with some of these things. So it's first thinking about why do I need this particular. So great if you want to do a theatre play, but why is that the best way of mobilizing your research findings to a particular audience? And if you've identified that's the best way, then we can look at how to do that and resource it. But often people start, I just want to do it in animation or infographic because that's creative and nice. But why? Who is it for? How are they going to use it? And how can you ensure that they will use it? So asking those questions first can save you a lot of time in going down the wrong creative outputs that you don't really need and spend a lot of time and resource on. But I think it's starting simple. Sometimes just asking your stakeholders what is the best format for you to have an output to see the research findings. So I'm involved in various research projects with local authorities. And they usually don't want to see a research report. They don't want to read it. They don't understand it. They haven't got the time. But what they do value is a series of slides with the key points and some visual information around that. And that's quite easy to produce from your research findings, but it's a very helpful output for that particular audience. So sometimes it's the more simple outputs that are the most impactful, but it's linking that to the right audience and thinking that through. That's where the energy is. But it's also making best use. That's a discussion we had a bit in our group, is how can you make best use of what you already do? So we talked about sort of realist co-production workshops, which is a data gathering exercise. But as part of that, you also identify participants who can be potential knowledge mobilizers for your findings in their particular networks and host organizations. So it's also double counting for what you already do in your research activity. How can you use that from a knowledge mobilization point of view and not doing something completely new, different and shiny, but making best use of what's already there? So starting small and experimenting with different ways, but also asking your stakeholders what would work best for you. How do you want to be involved? What's a good output? Can lead to further things. Thank you, Daniel. That's really helpful reflection. Anyone else who wants to share what they talked about in their breakout room? Any particular reflections on the who questions, or if you talked about other questions, fine too. Marie, would you like to come in?
Yeah. So I guess I kind of did a lot of talking in our group because I'm involved in a project at the moment where we have kind of got some follow-on funding from an initial study we did, and the initial study was looking at kind of well-being and stresses faced by resident doctors in anaesthesia, and kind of the interventions and kind of positive things that can be done to support them. And we've now got some follow-on funding, which is Impact Acceleration Award funding, to kind of try and obviously disseminate the findings from that and to kind of get the knowledge out there. And so what we're doing is we're going to use, building on findings from the earlier project, we're going to turn some of the kind of participants' stories, really, some of their narratives, which were really, really kind of powerful around these issues, into kind of vignettes, and we're going to make some videos using them. And then we're going to host some workshops, particularly kind of aimed at educational supervisors, kind of the people who are working with those doctors kind of locally on the ground. And we're kind of aiming, the kind of stories we're using are selected to focus on the findings that were kind of really about what changes could be made at that local level. And we're working with colleagues in arts, kind of the School of Arts, who have a particular approach to making those videos and to running workshops around them. So it's kind of a structured workshop approach. And we have kind of involvement from some kind of key organisations. So the Association of Anaesthetists and the Society for Education in Anaesthesia particularly. And the Society are going to host the workshops for us and help us with recruiting kind of participants to come and engage in them. So, yeah, we kind of hope that that is going to be a really good way of kind of mobilising the knowledge from that earlier study. One thing that we talked about was that I think in this project, and Jason also talked about how we've been involved in projects where we've made kind of animations or videos, and then that's been kind of the end of it. Like they've just sat there. Like, you know, like then what? So we're kind of hoping that this approach, this structured approach, which our colleagues in arts have used a lot before, and using them in the workshops, is kind of going to actually make those things meaningful and kind of make sure they are having some effect and getting across to people rather than just kind of making them for the sake of making them.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like an amazing plan that you have already and that you're putting into play. How did you go about developing that? So how did you?
Oh, that is also the really important thing I need to say, isn't it? So we did the earlier project, kind of did the research, got the findings, and as part of that, kind of disseminating the findings from that, we did a webinar for the Society of Education in Anaesthesia, and we'd done some presentations for the Royal College. So we'd kind of been engaging with those organisations already. But actually in the research team, we talked a lot about the power of the narratives in the resident doctor stories and some of the experiences they were telling us about, and how we wanted to do something to make better use of that data. And then we were talking about kind of the initial kind of dissemination was focused on the national level, and we wanted to do something that was kind of more ground level, more local.
Yeah.
And then this funding was available, and we thought, well, let's go for it and let's do something. But the other key thing I was going to say is that I'm one of the leads working on this project. The other one is a very senior anaesthetist who has really, really good connections with those organisations already. So he was like really key in kind of getting them on board as partners in it. So yeah, I didn't want to make it sound like I'd just gone out there and got all these people involved.
No, but so you're making good use of different assets. So a PI who already got very good relationships there through existing activities delivered. You then identified other outputs that will be helpful and embed that knowledge into practice. And there was connections you had that you can help with the design and the structure of those workshops. And I think narratives and storytelling are a really important tool in knowledge mobilization, because they make the evidence relatable and personalized, and often very, very practical, which is partly why I opened with a story as a way of showing that. But scenario building is other ways in which people have tried to sort of make evidence relatable to a particular context, and make people think through solutions in that context. So yeah, narrative tools are really powerful knowledge mobilization techniques, and finding ways of incorporating them can be really powerful, but take time also to develop. So having people who have structured approaches for that they can bring in is good, is really useful. Thank you for sharing that. That's really nice to hear, and a great example, I think. Anyone else who wants to share any of their discussions, things they picked up? Regina.
Yeah, in our group we talked a little bit about different projects, and in my project it's a small project looking at and exploring barriers and enablers experienced by underrepresented healthcare professionals in postgraduate training, and really it was funded to kind of look at identifying strategies to make training pathways more equitable, inclusive, and sustainable, in sort of focused on the UK. It's in the early stages, and I was just talking in the group that it was a research project, but to get stakeholder buy-in and going through ethics, I changed it to evaluation. Because it felt like they needed more stakeholder involvement. And it wasn't focused on just medical professionals, it was broad allied healthcare professionals as well. And when I took it to the PPI group, there was a lot of sort of questions around, is it open to everyone in healthcare, you know, including everyone that work in the labs, or if they work, you know, as in the canteen or whatever, you know, and all those kind of questions. I was focused, so I narrowed that down, and in that way that links to, you know, who the stakeholders are and which groups, you know, it gets easier to identify. So I said, you know, so I was able to identify, you know, the colleges, maybe some deaneries. Not everybody understands what a deanery is if they're from a different, you know, allied healthcare profession. So terminology, looking at all that as well, changing that. And so identifying the stakeholders became easier. But then one of our questions in the group was, you know, we can identify, but how do we get them on board in these, you know, groups to be mobilized, to be active, you know, in the process? Because they might and agree with you that, yeah, you know, equity is really important. And then some people say in the group it's quite a good hot topic as well, you know. But how do you get them to do the like active element of participation and dissemination? And there were some good, you know, suggestions in the groups around, you know, early kind of conversations around what can we do, you know, in this, and what would work for you, and getting them to vocalize what, you know, the outcomes could, you know, be for them that are useful and meaningful for changes. So those kind of conversations were really useful in the group, and getting alongside people as well in those groups that it's important for.
Absolutely. Really helpful reflections, and absolutely sometimes changing research design can help in being easier to engage stakeholders, and like I said, how do you engage those stakeholders? And that often starts with asking, how do you want to be engaged? And sometimes you get the answer back, no, I don't want to, I haven't got time, I haven't got interest, and that's fine. But other people will be, and a lot of that is based on the relationship you build with them through the research process, where they get more engaged and more interested in what you do as they see what's emerging. And I think having that ongoing conversation with them, and clarifying, also asking them what stage do they want to be involved, because sometimes they at the beginning they don't want to be involved at all, but as they see things are developing, they get interested, seeing more opportunities, and then if you create those opportunities, you engage them more in that space. So sometimes it's a developing journey also for them, that you haven't got that all clear at the start, but that works out as the research develops. So that's, I think, a really good approach to it. But some people won't want to engage or actively oppose your research, and it's also being aware of that and working around some of these people. Thank you for sharing that.
Thanks.
That's really, really helpful insights. Thank you for in a short space of time to coming up with all these interesting reflections and from your own experiences. I'm conscious of time, so I've got 2 more slides to quickly show you before I think we go to a bit of a break. So bear with me while I bring the slides back up. So we've done breakout room. Oh. Yeah, so what I would like to finish on is sort of thinking about some of the remaining challenges around knowledge mobilization, but also how can we make it a bit more fun. So starting with some of the challenges, I think a big issue in academia particularly is sort of the lack of structural incentives to support knowledge mobilization. So how do you make this a viable career pathway for people to work and think and act in this way? That also relates to training. So there's often a lack of training about how to do knowledge mobilization, and also to do with the nature of motion itself. I call it a craft, so it's not something that you can just pick up by doing an online course somewhere. It's something you develop as you go along, and finding time and resources to do that can be a challenge. That also requires leadership to sort of support you in creating that time and finding resources to engage with knowledge mobilization. So how do you sort of embed a knowledge mobilization infrastructure and culture in research organizations? That also includes mentoring. So often there's a lack of mentoring for people who work more across boundaries as embedded researchers. The need for a community of practice to share some of the learning, including the failures of what doesn't work. Sometimes there's more learning in what didn't work than what did work. And the last point is really about sort of really a lack of research on the practice of knowledge mobilization. There's a lot of frameworks out there and tools that tell you how to do it, but what does it actually look like in practice, and how do you do it? And this is where I think there's a toothbrush problem. This is sort of mentioned, everybody has a theory of model, but no one really wants to use anyone else's model or framework. So being less shy in using what's already out there and just giving it a go and using it differently is good and should be tried more often. But how can we make it more fun? And this is, I think, where sort of a dance metaphor comes in. You might have seen Strictly Come Dancing at Bowles doing his famous dance moves there. But in a sense, I think knowledge mobilization is both a science and an art. So you need to sort of learn the steps of knowledge mobilization, the science, but it's also about how do you perform the steps, the art, and how do you bring those two together to choreograph sort of more like a dance, a routine that blurs the boundaries between the knowledge producers and the users. And this comes down often to really everyday skills, listening to stakeholders, using your emotional intelligence, using your persuasion skills, and relating your knowledge to people's sense of self to make it relevant for them. And what's often forgotten in that is the importance of emotions. Acknowledge feelings in knowledge mobilization. A lot of the implementation and knowledge mobilization barriers are often very personal. So for instance, scientists blaming the stubbornness of practitioners for insisting on doing it their way, believing they know their patients best, while practitioners sort of lamenting the smugness of scientists who believe that if they publish it, then practitioners will use it. And this signifies that there's misperceptions and different emotions at work that need to be addressed as part of knowledge mobilization. So how do you develop that instinct of where you are in that dance? And I think the best way of doing that is spending time in each other's contexts. So in that sense, be more at Bowles, go out there, spend time in other people's contexts, choreograph the dance, see how it goes, and use your people skills to do that. I want to thank you really for listening to me, taking part in the breakout rooms, contributing your own reflections and knowledge, which has been really helpful and insightful. I just want to do a quick plug at the end for a knowledge for an incubator network that I'm involved in myself, which is the Knowledge Mobilization Incubator for Inclusive Research, which is a new incubator that started this year. We're developing a website at the moment called NoMap to look at sort of knowledge mobilization, provide a guide for people who want to work in this space. If you would like to know more and meet some of the people or join the incubator, you're very welcome, and I can send you more details if you're interested. But let's end where we start. How are you feeling now after all the conversations that we had, the things that I've been talking about? Where are you now on the scale of cats? Can I get another round of figures? Someone is very happy, elated. A 9, ready for the party. Fantastic. So give us an indication. And if you're still feeling very tired and overwhelmed by it, that's absolutely fine as well.
Thanks very much, Peter. We've been really grateful for your time, and that was an excellent session. I can't believe time has whizzed by. So I think everyone will have taken away some really valuable, practical points around knowledge mobilisation. And thanks very much for sharing about the new incubator. Now, Peter, are you able to share your slides? Would that be possible?
Yeah, absolutely.
Fabulous.
I'll share them after this meeting. And if you want to follow up on any conversations, very happy to do that. Circulate the info as well about the node map, no problem. But yeah, really nice to meet you. Thank you for having me. And hopefully that was helpful and made you think in a different way. And enjoy the rest of your program, really.
Thank you very much indeed. So we are about to take a short break with a view to reconvening in about 10 minutes. So stretch your legs, grab a cup of tea or coffee, and then we'll come back to hear from Prof. Karen Matic about her particular career journey. So look forward to seeing you in a few minutes. Thank you again, Peter. Have a good day.
Thank you very much. Take care, everyone.
So Karen, very much welcome to our group. Thank you for joining us today. This is the bit that I always love, actually, which is hearing how other folk have developed through their career, the highs, and I'm sure there'll be some lows in there as well, that make us all feel a little bit more human. So it's fantastic for you to join us. Just to say, this is our group of Connect. We have 22, well, we've got about 20 folk here today and a couple that couldn't make it. But these are our fabulous group of committed researchers in clinical education research. So we're delighted to have you. I'm going to actually let Karen introduce herself because I know that's one of her slides. So without further ado, let's sit back and listen to Karen's story. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks, Jill. Thanks, everybody, for the invite. And it's really great to be here. I'm with Jill. I always enjoy listening to other people's sort of career stories, particularly in a clinical education research space, because, you know, no two stories or journeys are the same. So actually I always find it quite reassuring to hear that often people have found their way to this space in quite roundabout routes, because that makes me feel somewhat better about my own route, which I will proceed to share with you. So bear with me while I hopefully screen share. I'm actually calling in from the ASME office headquarters in Edinburgh, and the board meeting outside has just piled out. So there's lots of people in the background. So I hope you can't hear that.
Not at all. We can see your
Good.
Slides beautifully.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to say something about my career journey. I think we have 30 minutes. I don't plan to talk for that long, but I think that's the length of the slot. I'm conscious that it's towards the end of your program, so I was thinking about how can I keep you awake? But hopefully there's some things in here that will be of interest. So I'm going to outline my career journey. I was thinking about how to do it, and I think what I'm going to do is kind of talk you through parts of my CV, because I think not only will that cover the career journey, but I think it might get you thinking about your own CVs, which of course are a really important thing in thinking about the next steps of career journeys. Inevitably, our CVs tend to focus on the successes, and as I have much material that could fill many CVs of failure for sure, and I'll mention some of those things as well. And you know, by sharing insights into my own clinical education research career journey, hopefully it will have you reflecting on your own. And as I go along, I've got some reflections, things that I was thinking about as I was putting this together, some tips which, you know, are things that I guess I wish I'd known earlier on, and then time for questions. So my current the current role, so I guess this is, you know, in the CV, the bit at the top which says, you know, what you're doing now. So my main role is I'm Professor of Medical Education at Exeter. So I've been professor since 2015. I've actually been at Exeter since 2002, which is a very long time. I'd never been to Exeter before I started working there, so I clearly didn't plan to stay necessarily a long time, but that's how it's worked out. And I guess that might be another conversation about the challenges of progressing a career when you stay in one place, because very often the way people progress careers is about moving around, but not all of us have that luxury or that aspiration. So that might be something we could come back to. So since 2022, I've been the lead for our Health Professions Education and Wellbeing Research Group. And some people on the call know that very well. Some people are part of it. So hello to those. I'm also president of ASME, our Association for the Study of Medical Education, and I'm in the headquarters today in Edinburgh. And I've been doing that for 3 years. And another thing we might want to come back to in discussion is that I'm a member for the National Institute of Health Research, Health and Care Delivery Research Funding Committee. And that's something I've done for 3 years now as well. And again, you know, that might come into it because actually being on a funding committee gives you some insights into how other people are applying for funding, you know, the things that they include in those applications. And that's been probably my biggest development area in my career in the last couple of years. So that's an important piece of what I'm doing at the moment. So this image here seemed to sum up a career journey a bit for me. I think many people have kind of a clear destination in mind for their career journey. But it wasn't so much the clear destination that resonated for me. It was the significant twists and turns, and actually I think there's a little light bulb by that biggest U-turn. So actually there's something about learning from all sorts of deviations from that perhaps direct course, and that's definitely been the you know, my reflection on my career. But also the fact that he's got a map. This guy's got a rucksack, he's got tools, he's got resources, he's probably got mentors and advisors there somewhere too. So that just seemed like a kind of image that sums it up quite well. So this is my CV. You probably can't read it. And just to say, that bit at the top left, current positions, is the bit I've already spoken to. But I'm going to basically work around this CV in terms of the tips and reflections. So the next bit I'm going to focus on is the bit on the middle left-hand side called education. So that's where I'm starting. So education. So people often come to work in the clinical education space later in their career. So people often develop some kind of an expertise, a body of knowledge or expertise before they become educators and before they start to do research into education. So I think one of the really interesting things about clinical education research careers is that they often start later. So I trained first as a microbiologist, epidemiologist. So you can see in the education box on the top right, I did a BSc, MSc, and a PhD in clinical microbiology and epidemiology. So that was my kind of expertise or knowledge base at that time. Until I was about 30, and you can tell I was a scientist because here is a photo of me then, and I don't know if you can tell, but these are DNA strands either side of me, so that's how you know I was definitely a scientist. And then on the right hand side is an image of salmonella, actually, from my PhD thesis. So so this is me being a proper scientist, age 30. But then in 2002, I moved into a clinical education space, and I did an MSc in clinical in education research at that time, which was put on by our School of Education, and that MSc was unlike anything I'd ever done before. They used words like ontology and epistemology that completely blew my mind. I'd never heard of any of this. I'd never come across philosophy or paradigms. So this was completely brand new to me. On my CV, the fact that I've did a second MSc might look a bit like, oh, I made a mistake first time round. It might look kind of like you've changed your mind or that you've regretted your first choice. But actually, sort of retrospectively, although it might have felt like twists and turns prospectively, it kind of makes sense to me now retrospectively. And that kind of idea of building a body of knowledge or an area of expertise, then becoming involved in education and then learning more about education, that makes sense retrospectively. So I guess my sort of tip that I would have given myself back then would have been follow your interests, but narrate your trajectory positively. So I probably was quite self-critical about my career. I'm like, oh, well, what am I doing now? I'm doing something different. So it didn't necessarily make sense prospectively, but it sort of does retrospectively. So trying to narrate the trajectory positively. So then moving into the kind of previous positions bits of my CV, another reflection is that promotions in clinical education, promotions through career stages, are typically not only due to research. Most people are doing something else as well, whether that is clinical work or work as an educator or leadership roles. There are some people who are what at Exeter we would call a research only career path, but I think they are the minority in the clinical education research field. And so people may be promoted through grades and through positions where research is a piece, but it might be a small piece of the jigsaw. So there's something about being open to opportunities to progress your career, even if that is with a lead on something other than research, but maybe research can be a part of it. And just remembering that there's clearly no one size fits all to these career journeys. And I just highlighted in red a couple of kind of places where I was sort of doing a bit of a step change. So in 2002, the date, this 2007 should say 2002. So this is when I moved from being a clinical scientist to being a research fellow and then a lecturer in clinical education, senior lecturer in clinical education. So the first kind of shift was in 2002 when I moved more into a clinical education space. But then another kind of sort of clear shift for me was first of all when I moved into the role of Associate Director for Undergraduate Medical Studies at Peninsula Medical School, which was the combined university medical school across Exeter and Plymouth. And then through the disaggregation of those two medical schools, then found myself not the associate director because the director and the other associate director were then in the Plymouth side of our disaggregation. So then finding myself through chance really to be then being the co-director. And then another change was in 2015 I moved out of the medical school into a secondment in the School of Education within the University of Exeter. So it was literally a couple 100 metres across the quad, this grass quad that we've got on our campus, but actually like 1,000,000 miles away in terms of the research they were doing, the things they were reading, the theories they were referring to. So it was a completely different, and I learned a huge amount from that secondment, which I think, well, it was like 2 years or 3 years. Anyway, it was a short time, but a really significant change. And that was when I was made professor. And another reflection is that it would have probably been much harder for me to be made professor staying within the medical school, whereas there was something about that move that allowed that promotion to be possible in a way that it would have been harder. So I didn't move institution, but I did move school and department. So I guess, yeah, being open to opportunities, no one size fits all. And as Jill says, underpinning people's CVs, there's all the other things that I applied for and didn't get, and all the other things that obviously don't make it onto a CV, but there were lots of those. Then this bit of my CV was more about the kind of professional activities. So there's kind of the roles that we have. There might be publication, there might be grants, but then there's all these other activities. They don't quite fit into the day job. They're things that you might do. So highlighted in red is roles I've had associated with journals. So for example, as deputy editor of the Medical Education Journal, or being, having some national roles. So they're kind of additional things, which have pros and cons, of course. These all take a lot of time, but you do learn a lot from them. So I guess my reflection on that is that careers are long, so you don't have to do everything right now. So I think if I were telling my younger self, I'd say, just, chill out, enjoy the ride. Don't try and do everything at once. Just take one thing that you're really interested in doing now and do that. And I guess the other bit of learning is you don't have to keep doing the same things. You can take the learning from a particular role or opportunity, do it for a few years, and then move on, and that's an opportunity for others, but it's also you're probably the learning you're getting from doing that thing is gonna become less over time. I guess another reflection on looking at my CV in order to chop it up to do this was that I find it quite uncomfortable to sort of talk about doing things really well, or I'm a great whatever. I find that quite uncomfortable, and actually find it much more comfortable to be quite factual. I've had these roles from these dates, or where there is a bit of selling yourself to be done, using other people's quotes. So I've got a quote in here from the ASME President's Medal. I feel much more comfortable in lifting that. This is what someone else said about me. So we're all asked to sell ourselves a bit, so we have to find a way that's comfortable to do that, particularly in CVs and stuff. But just that might be a tip if others feel similarly. And I guess another tip was, in CVs, we tend to kind of put everything into a CV. It becomes a kind of storage place of all this information. But even in a 2-page CV, you can't fit everything in, and actually trying to cram too much in can actually dilute attention from the things that you'd really like people to notice. And so there's lots of things that I do that don't feature on my CV, like teaching or marking, or I think these are things that people would assume you do if you are, have a particular role in a university. It probably doesn't need saying. So I guess in a CV, it's about putting in the things that you think are worth bringing to people's attention, and aren't just things that everybody in that kind of a role would be doing. And then the last 2 sections are about publications and grants, and I was sort of stepping back a bit from these sections on my CV and thinking, what am I wondering when I read other people's publications? And this might be quite helpful for yourselves in looking, at your own CV. So in terms of publications, when I look at people's publications, first of all, I'm wondering, how much have they published? How experienced, or so there's something about the quantity of publications. I'll also be wondering, who is their audience in publishing? Who are they writing for? And often the way you're going to assess that is by the journals. So which journals are people publishing in? And I guess one thing to say about that is, although probably my closest journal affiliation is Medical Education, because I was deputy editor there. That isn't necessarily where I've published the most, partly because they're quite hard to publish in, but also because a lot of the messages from my research are for healthcare professionals, healthcare leaders, and they probably aren't reading medical education. And so although I am part of that health professions education field, often where I'm publishing are places like BMJ Open, BMC Medicine, BMC Quality and Safety, and particularly because a lot of my research is about workforce well-being, that actually we are quite keen to publish in places like BMJ Quality and Safety, because well-being is sometimes seen as a bit of a nice to have and something a bit fluffy. We're trying to take it right back into, these are quality issues, safety issues. This is about the outcomes that CEOs are concerned about. So we are deliberately trying to publish in places given a particular audience and a particular approach to the messaging. I guess looking at people's publications, I'm also wondering, are they good quality publications? So again, that's something about the journal very often. Are people publishing in good places? Are the publications themed? Do they tell some kind of a story collectively? And also, what role does the person play in within these publications? And often you can tell that in terms of whether they're the first author, a middle author, the last author. You get a sense of, is this the person who's done all the data collection, the data analysis, led the writing, or is this somebody more in an overseeing type role? Or you get a sense across a group of publications. So by thinking what people might be wondering, you can hopefully decide what are the priority things to show in a CV. And similarly on grants, I think often readers looking at people's grants, they're wondering, does this person, so if I'm assessing an application on our funding committee, if we look at people's track record, first of all, you're wondering if they've got that sustained track record of grant income. And there's something about the size of pots of funding and trajectory. So often people earlier career are going to have smaller pots of funding, but that might be the footprint to maybe then getting into middle-sized pots of fundings, which might be from the regulators in order to step into larger sort of scale work. And I think one positive thing when you look at somebody else's CV is if they have repeated funding from the same funder, it probably means they've done a pretty good job. The funder's probably not going to give repeat funding to somebody who didn't deliver or do a good job. So that's always a kind of a reassurance. And again, similar to publications, probably people looking at this are making some kind of an assessment of people's role on the team, again, in terms of author order. And, I put the NIHR logo there at the bottom because I think increasingly in the clinical education research field, we are seeing the NIHR very much as our funder for people who are looking for a funded career where their time is bought out to undertake research. That isn't necessarily a value judgment, because there will be people whose primary role is as an educator or a leader or a clinician, and that may not be compatible with big chunks of time bought out by funding. So therefore, smaller grants or more student-based projects or more regulator-based activity could be the right thing for them. So just to finish up this, coming back to this slide, I mean, my career journey, like many others in clinical education, has definitely been twisting and turning, but actually looking back, I don't regret that at all. And some of the things I've learned the most from were the things where I took the biggest leap. So a big leap out of microbiology, epidemiology research into clinical education was really daunting, but actually, you know, I definitely don't regret that. And similarly, that leap into a school of education for a while, even though I felt a bit of a fish out of water and I felt very much in my comfort zone returning to the medical school, I learned way more through doing that than I could have done through staying still, even though geographically I didn't move very far conceptually, and it was a very long way away. So yeah, so that is my CV. Lots and lots of failure underpinning that. So CVs are glossy, but there's lots, and many. I know many of you on the call, so many of you will have been part of that journey and will know about some of the successes and failures along the time. So please do feel free to ask me anything or share your own career journeys or reflections. Let me stop sharing.
Thanks very much, Karen. That's fabulous. I think it's really lovely to see how career progression is achievable. Sometimes it doesn't always feel that where you want to be is achievable. So, and certainly something I take away is that career progression takes time, but you have time to progress. So it doesn't all have to be done within the next 5 years. So I think that's just a point from my own reflection. Any comments for, any questions for Karen? Richard.
Thank you, Karen. That was really great. Really enjoyed that. It's very helpful, and thank you for actually sharing your CV. That's really nice to see. So I guess your move out of co-lead for the medical course, you were sort of, to my mind, you know, that's a sort of a funded position where you're kind of it's a secure funded position where you're doing something that's sort of very coal-facey, that people want you to do. And then I imagine your it seems like your next step, you're moving into something that would seem to be quite hard for a university to find the funding to do, and could put you in a more vulnerable situation funding wise. Was that the case? And how did I'm just interested in that transition, because I can imagine universities might say, oh, we haven't got the money to support that next step.
Yeah, no, I think your analysis is absolutely spot on. That was probably a bit of a leap from something that we are always going to need program leaders, and into, do we really need a centre for research and professional learning? You know, that and it is interesting. I think there's something about age and stage and people being more up for, or more up for risk, or less daunted by risk. I didn't particularly perceive it as particularly risky at that time, bizarrely. There's also something about societally. I mean, I think we're all very aware of, you know, challenges societally with the HE sector. So I think I am much more aware that, you know, jobs in universities can disappear. You know, that wasn't particularly, I mean, I guess I sort of thought, well, this might not work out, but then I'll do something else. So I was probably a little bit naive on that. But I think also the program leadership, and that obviously medical programs are big. You know, if you've got 200 medical students in 5 years, you've got 1,000 students, and that's a lot of people to be getting into all sorts of kind of trouble and, you know, things. So, and it's a big staff base. So there's a very big operational aspect to that role that really sort of took everything energy and time wise, and so it would be quite hard to sustain a research career alongside that. And bearing in mind I came from research, so I joined as, so in a way my comfort zone early on was research, and that it probably felt quite daunting to completely leave that behind as well, and actually I really enjoy it. So yeah, I think your analysis is spot on. Interestingly, I didn't particularly think it was risky at the time. In retrospect, it probably was. And I also had that return because I did it as a secondment. I was coming back to the medical school in 2 years' time. So it felt reversible, I guess, is the other thing I'd say.
Thanks, Karen. I was going to ask something similar in a way, or it maybe follows on from Richard's question, is that we often get lots of opportunities. Some come along like buses. Sometimes a gap can go between those opportunities, but they all require decision making. So, and what you haven't spoken to is perhaps how you've reached those decisions, how you've decided between opportunity A and B. Is there someone or people within your professional space that you've been able to sign some of those decisions with?
Yeah, lots, I would say. You know, and even now, you know, even decisions. So at least one of you on the call, I'm sort of toying with a change of name of Professor of Medical Education because it doesn't quite capture what I do now. So I've been sounding various people out about, well, you know, what does that mean for you? What would that? I know that's not a big decision, but I think I have had a really important kind of peer mentoring relationship with another academic of a similar career stage. And I think our role has almost been to egg each other on, kind of going, go on, do it. And actually, there is I probably only shared things with her that I subconsciously wanted to be egged into and didn't quite feel brave enough and just needed someone to say, you know, just what's the worst that can happen here? Just have a go. Yeah, and I guess, you know, reflecting on it, I think Exeter has provided quite a supportive space in a place where you could take a few risks, and you know, there's been really good people around me, which maybe in a less supportive environment you would be less prepared to take risks.
Thank you. Any other questions? Asim, you had your hand up a little moment ago. Did you have a question?
Yeah, yeah, I did, but it wasn't too dissimilar from the one you just asked, Gillian. So yeah, the thing I was wondering, Karen, you know, after getting all this experience in the field, when you've got all these opportunities offered to you, and you've got to make a decision between, you know, you've got your career, your research career, and the roles involved in that, but then also all the additional roles on the side. How do you like, what do you have a formula in mind as to how you balance it? Like, I can take up 1, 2, or 3 additional roles before I need to call it quits.
Yeah, I tried to do a bit of a one in, one out job, at least. So I try not to do things for too long, for you know, for reasons I've already stated. But I do think it's helpful for the person and the environment for people to switch it up. And so if I'm going to take something on, I make myself do a bit of an audit of, right, well, what could I stop? So for example, the ASME president role, I'm going to stop in July because I have another role starting. So, you know, that's kind of the deal with myself. And just to say, you know, it's not just work things. It's I have 3 children, you know, busy. So it's also sometimes it's my family saying, yeah, you're a bit focused on work right now. You know, the balance isn't quite there. So it's that ongoing audit of the work portfolio and the whole life portfolio, and just trying to keep things in some kind of a balance.
Fantastic. Any other questions for Karen?
Lily. Hi, Lily.
Hi, Karen. Thank you for a great talk. Really inspiring. And just on that note of having 3 children, thank you for sharing that. I think one of the things we see, particularly in clinical academia, is women really struggling to kind of progress into senior posts, and often they're taking research opportunities later in life. And I just wondered what your top tips are for kind of juggling children and being around for them and making it as a researcher, because what I'm increasingly seeing is the clinical academic workforce just seem to work all hours, all days, and ultimately sacrifice their family life. So do you have any top tips?
I think Devon, living in Devon helps with that, because the people around me also really protect their life, their life outside of work. We have a rush hour around 3:30 on a Friday, and so it is easier in that environment, I would say. I think I think there's something about enjoying work, and I think my children, who are now late teens, early 20s, sort of kind of can see some work effort, but also some enjoyment of work, and that work shouldn't only be a negative. So that's something. And I think, you have to have your own boundaries, even if it slows or ultimately stops your career. I very rarely work a weekend, even unless there is some deadline or crisis or something, but it is very rare that I open my laptop at the weekends. I work hard in the week, but that's kind of my deal with myself. And yeah, and certainly through much of my career, I work full time at the moment, but I haven't done most. So through most of that, I was working about an 80% or a bit more contract, which meant that I could be at the school gate at least twice a week. So I think we each have to make our own kind of self rules and boundaries, and also hopefully have friends and partners and others who tell us when we've got that boundary out of kilter one way or the other. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Silly. An important question. Great. Well, if I'm going to keep to time, well, thank Karen again very much. And I'm sure you'd be willing for folk to reach out to you directly if there are any further questions. But thanks very much for your time today. I'm going to finish off. I think I'll come back to a couple of little slides. And here we go. And let's move on. Oh, final thoughts. So there's a couple of things. The first thing was really just to get you to think over the next couple of minutes, whilst I go through the last couple of slides, what might be your take-home messages from the programme, and any other thoughts and suggestions for what you might need to get to the next step in your career. Maybe a takeaway thought of what you've learned from someone else or other people in your small group today. So have a little think about that, because it'd be nice just for you guys to reflect on your experience. But I also just wanted to flag a few ongoing opportunities. The first being around the Clinical Teacher Journal edition. We've had a number of expressions of interest around the masterclasses, in terms of preparing an article that speaks to the masterclasses we've run. If there are any other team members that would like to contribute to the articles that relate to our PPI session, our large data session, our KM session, please reach out to me, or Hannah, or to Marta, or to Nicola. And we'll provide a bit more information on the journal edition in the coming days. To flag a new opportunity, which is about creatively sharing our knowledge from this program of work. And what we're planning to do is to work with an artist to design the outputs of the stories from each of our Connect series. So if you'd like to work with us, working with an artist around that, again, please reach out to us. We'd like you to watch the session back, highlight the key learning, meet with a designer, and then they will turn it from thinking into cartoons and lots of lovely pictures. So I think it'll be great fun, and it very much speaks to the KM work that we've been talking about, which is very unfamiliar to me to be that creative. So again, please talk to us if you'd like to get involved in that work. Okay, now we will have another ask for you. One is, and I'm looking at Marta, so whether we have a feedback form that's going to go in the chat or whether that will come out afterwards.
It will come out
afterwards. In terms of snippets for social media, what would you like for that, Marta?
I think what we had was to contact the plan was to contact participants to see if they wanted to share with us or the learnings or the benefits they gained from joining these sessions, and that would be part of the final email as well.
Fantastic. So really it might be
yeah, it would be great to hear from people.
A little bit of a headshot and a couple of sentences perhaps as to what you gained and how you will apply knowledge from this event, because that will help us attract other individuals to be part of Connect 2, which we hope to be funded, and we will be in touch in the next short while around Connect 2, which is the add-on to this programme, before the end of the year. Just in relation to keeping in touch, you probably have spotted that I've popped in the chat that I think it'd be great if we could cascade a list of all the team members, your role, where you're based, and your email addresses to allow you to keep in contact. So if anyone, don't feel that you have to do that, but if anyone would not like to do that, please, again, let Marta know. So we will be coming back to you in the next wee while to ask for a little bit of feedback, brief feedback, and if you'd like to help us share the learning from this event on social media. And what I might do is stop sharing at this point and really just open the floor for any reflections on the programme as a whole, or from today's session.
Sorry, Jill, can I just clarify?
Yeah.
Thank you. If we've reached out to you earlier on in the programme about those things, do you want us to do it again to refresh, or is that already?
I've got your name. Yes, I've got
Fab.
you. I've got you there. So we'll reach out to you. So yeah, just if you haven't done and it's dropped off your radar, then please reach out to us. Richard.
Yeah. So I just to say thank you very much, Jill, for organising, and I guess two reflections. There were some of the things that I found useful. There were sessions on things that I didn't know. So I quite like the way you brought stuff, so the thing on the big data stuff, I haven't really had much involvement with data science, and it was just, even though a lot of it went over my head, it kind of gave me a flavour of what the data science approach is and where people are coming from and what they're thinking. And quite often the sessions were useful that way. So even today with the knowledge mobilisation, again, just now I've got a sense of what that is. I was in a session at the university where somebody started going on about doing fancy things data science wise after the data science session, and I kind of was able to access much more of that talk because and I'm sure it'll be the same with knowledge mobilisation. So I like the way you did that, almost kind of opening us up to things that I sense that you probably thought, well, they'll know this stuff, but I don't think they may not be aware of these areas. So I liked that. And then obviously great hearing personal stories and the way that you brought those in as well. So thank you very much. It's been really, really good. Really enjoyed it.
Fantastic. I think it's great just having that knowledge, isn't it, about the language of different disciplines. You don't need to know everything. That's why research is done as a team, but it's good to have enough knowledge that you could understand what the other team members are doing, how and why. Yeah, absolutely. Nagina.
Thank you. Just building on to what Richard said, it was really nice to have all the speakers and have that knowledge as well built into Connect One. But for me, I just wanted to highlight the fact that, you know, being in the clinical sort of academic space and being an underrepresented sort of researcher, it gets a little bit difficult sometimes to be in that space. So it's been really nice having a group and being part of a group and learning together. And I think what it contributed for me was the fact that I thought everything, all the opportunities. And I think what it's given me is kind of like the insight to step back and really think about my next steps and what I want to do. So I think that's been really, really insightful and helpful in the way that I kind of, you know, do build instead of building everything and it's all feeling too much and then not getting some of the results that I think I'll get. I think and then it becoming a painful sort of process. So I feel like it's been a really good space for me to have that time for reflection as well and learn from everyone and just, you know, pace myself. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome. I have to say, someone earlier this week talked about research being quite a lonely space. And I think this has been a great opportunity to meet with like-minded individuals and absolutely feel that connection, not to overuse the word, with others and to stand back, even if it's only for a couple of hours, and yes, ponder on where your career is going to. So thank you. So maybe last comment from Russell. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to echo everyone's thanks, it's been a really privilege to be part of the Connect programme. I think my reflection is that it can be quite hard to find time, to carve out time to develop a researcher identity, and it's almost nice to have permission from the programme to put bits of time in your diary that are committed to doing just that and broadening our horizons a little bit. And as others have said, the power of making new connections and broadening horizons a little bit. I think I've made some connections that I hope are going to last a long time and be very useful as I hopefully continue to develop as a researcher. So thank you very much.
Fantastic. Well, listen, I think that's a lovely point to end on. It feels like we've done the job that we set out to do, which is amazing. I just wanted to close by thanking Marta for all her really fabulous coordination. Nicola Brennan, who might have left the call, and perhaps most especially to Hannah Gillespie, who is the powerhouse behind the programme. So Hannah has very much been central to successful delivery, so particular thanks to Hannah. So you'll hear from us all. We look forward to keeping in contact. We look forward to a Connect 2 series, fingers crossed. But otherwise, we will let you escape almost on time. And thank you very much for all your fabulous contributions today. It's been lovely to see you all again, and have a great rest of day.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Hi.